For 7 years, Republicans have been pledging to kill Obamacare, the Affordable Care Act, which brought health care to millions who were previously without. During President Obama's 2 terms, House Republicans voted more than 60 times to repeal the act in whole or in part. Of course, that was never going to happen while Obama was still in office and had the power to veto the legislation. It was like challenging someone on the other side of the world with no access to travel to a fist fight. But on January 20th of this year, that person they challenged to fight got on a plane and showed up in Washington. The Republicans finally had control of every branch of government needed to undo what had been done. The House, the Senate, and the presidency now belong to the Republicans, and yet we are 9 months in and they have still, so far, been unable to kill the ACA. The House first tried to kill Obamacare in March, but didn't have the votes. In May, the House actually passed a bill repealing much of Obama's signature healthcare law. This rounding of first base was celebrated at the White House with a demonstration of white power like we haven't seen since the Nuremberg rallies. Normally I would mock, but okay, I too uproariously celebrated my own rounding of first base like it was the second coming of Christ at the age of 14. So, glass houses, right? In June, the Senate wrote a bill which was clearly drunk out of its mind as it couldn't even find the floor. Then, in July, the Senate got their repeal or skinny bill all the way to the floor, only to have an American hero who was captured in Vietnam, tortured, and who turned down an early release because he felt the offer was the result of privilege. That hero killed that bill with a very dramatic gladiator-style thumbs down. Very exciting stuff. Now, Republicans are, for a 5th time in 7 months, again trying to take away people's health care, sending it to the states this time, who are admittedly often better at not caring for their citizens than the federal government. See the list of states that cut off their people's noses to spite their faces by refusing to expand Medicaid as part of the Affordable Care Act. Who can blame them, though, for preferring their own conservative ideology over the well-being of their constituents? That's just what you do, right? As I shoot this, we don't know if this bill will pass or fail, but my suspicion is it will go down like the others. Why? Here's my theory. I think the Republicans know they don't represent the American people or their desires. They took power in 2016. They did. They got it. But they're not complete idiots. They know they got their power by manipulating the system rather than winning the hearts and minds of the American people. In 2010, the Republicans took the House and a large number of state assemblies and governorships, which then passed 25 laws in 19 states to restrict voting, making it harder to register and harder to vote. They passed voter ID laws. They limited voting times and dates. They took away the voting rights of millions of ex-felons who had paid their debt to society. They purged voter rolls, often removing people who had every right to vote. And in minority communities, they drastically cut the number of polling places, creating long wait times for the people who could least afford to take the time off. Republican victories in 2010 also allowed them to redraw maps defining congressional districts, turning previously Democratic and swing districts into safe Republican seats, meaning those districts are currently unwinnable by anyone but a Republican. This is called gerrymandering, and both parties do it. But this time around, it resulted in states like North Carolina having their redistricting maps nullified by the U.S. Supreme Court on the grounds that the maps were drawn in a clear attempt to disenfranchise certain voters, minorities in particular. Shocking, right? Good thing we don't need that Voting Rights Act anymore. And this was after the court had already rejected a North Carolina voter ID law on the same grounds, with the federal court saying that the law had targeted African Americans with surgical precision. The U.S. Senate is also unrepresentative of the American people. Each state gets 2 senators regardless of population. This means that a state like California, with a population of nearly 40 million people, gets the same number of senators as South Dakota, with a population 40 times smaller. This was intentional on the part of the founders, but when 70% of the U.S. population lives in 15 states, giving that 70% only 30% of the Senate, it's easy to see how poorly that body represents the whole. Finally, Republicans in power are also aware that they haven't won the popular vote in a national presidential election, but once since 1988, winning instead the Electoral College only in 2000 and 2016. Now, with this ability to game the system, you may be thinking, hey, Bri, why would they even care about the will of the American people? That's a good question. Well, because things might be about to change. This year, the Supreme Court will be deciding the constitutional validity of partisan gerrymandering. And in Electoral College news, numerous states have passed laws declaring that their electors, those who vote in the Electoral College, must vote for the winner of the popular vote. This is a legal way to nullify the anti-democratic Electoral College without requiring a constitutional amendment. If your state isn't one of those states to have passed such a law, you might want to contact your various state representatives and governors. As I was finishing up this piece, the New York Times decided to help me out with an assist. A story that this latest push to repeal the ACA was the result of a private meeting where Republican leaders learned that their donors were furious and that the donor class would not be forthcoming with funding if Republicans couldn't repeal Obamacare. And that's just about everything you need to know, isn't it? The American people don't want Obamacare repealed. It's the GOP donor class. That's who. So GOP leaders will try again, or at least pretend to try again, knowing full well that very soon the combination of donor money and gaming the system may not be enough should the power finally be returned to the people.